All right. Those are pretty much good to go. So look, I I don't normally do this shit. But make sure
Doesn't
y'all
he
know
absolutely
something.
curse God?
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna start doing it more. I'm usually doing something else while I'm doing this shit. But because I wasn't, I'm gonna finish this up real quick. Might stream something else later tonight. But I'm gonna get this out of the way real quick. Knock this out. Because I planned on doing this really quickly. It was not supposed to take as long as it is taking. And I've done some things differently, you know? Let's see here. We're about to get started here again. I just some things I want to get fixed here. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you follow, like, subscribe, that whole thing. I gotta remember to say that. We're doing a little housekeeping here. Um and yeah. If you're wondering why I got the shades on, it's just don't worry about it. I just feel like having them on right now. This was really painful to watch, so that's the only reason we're even on a second part for real. Um, Kind of dragged out a little longer than I expected it to. I mean, the video's longer than I expected it to be. I don't normally watch these all the way through, so that's another thing. I thought they were like an hour or something. This one's like an hour and a half. I don't know if this is normal for these. I know that they were here probably for a lot longer than this, though. So there's a lot of heavy editing. Um, but you know what? It's not too bad. So yeah, you know what? I gotta edit my titles here too. Did not do this. I'm trying to knock this out though. Part 2. Right? Right? Part 2. There we go. All right. So here we go. Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. Does he even like? Do they even show you like him talking to 20 different people? That's one thing I actually wonder about these sometimes. Like they have him like surrounded by the people and everything. But do they actually even show you like him talking to 20 people individually? Do 20 people ever even like get a chance to talk to him while he's there? And I wonder if like if somebody does so bad, do they just like cut them from the video entirely? Because I would. Although I'd probably have a version like bloopers, like uh, edited scenes, like for like fails, like a fail reel. I would totally do that. All right, so I hopefully I know I had an echo I think a little bit on the last video, so I mean I'm not fucking redoing it, so it'll just have to be there. Hopefully we don't have that this time. Um, and if you hear an echo, let me know. Um, One more thing I want to do here. Never mind. Hold on. There we go. That. Good to do that. All right. So JBP surrounded. Shall we continue?
No, his wife tells him to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm
My
glad they're
final
finally
point is
done
that
talking to
atheists
that guy.
accept Christian morality.
To be clear, like on the last prompt, I think it was everybody worships something even if they don't know it. He talked to like 2 guys for that one, and that last guy he was talking to for like a good I think like 10 minutes, 10 minutes. It was a pretty long time. Like I was ending the stream on that one last night, and I'm just like, wow, they're still fucking talking. Jeez. It was actually a pretty good back and forth. That was probably one of the more good faith ones.
but deny the religion's foundational stories.
Okay, so what he's saying is atheists accept Christian morality, but deny its foundational stories. Which, I mean, basically, like a lot of atheists would view themselves as what I think it's secular humanists to some degree or whatever. The funny thing is you could probably talk to a lot of atheists. A lot of people who claim they're atheists, and they probably wouldn't know what secular humanism is. That's one of the funniest things. So it's actually pretty accurate in terms of like how a lot of atheists, it's basically what he said, right? Like a lot of them don't really understand what they're rejecting. And yeah, truthfully, like a lot of them don't even understand that they're just accepting, like, moral frameworks that were created by Christians primarily, I'd say, at least in like the West and whatnot. And they kind of favor some kind of, secular humanist framework, but even that framework is kind of borrowing from Christianity in large part. Not to say that, there's some flaws in historical Christian morals. The ideal, per se, is definitely borrowed from a lot by atheists, and they kind of just deny the stories and the logic that Christians use to justify it. But they pretty much agree on a lot of morality. But let's see how this goes. This is probably also the first topic that actually has to do with Christianity, ironically enough.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands.
I'm not gonna lie, this guy has a weird face. There are a lot of ugly motherfuckers up here. And then the last guy was probably the first, like, kind of traditionally handsome guy, but all these motherfuckers are ugly.
Genocide in Deuteronomy and in Numbers and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story.
What? This is why this is in two parts. Because what the fuck did he just say? God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. Well, hey, guess what? God creates the moral framework. He doesn't have to fit within it. It's quite literally a rules for thee, not for me thing. Like, when you're talking about morals in a religious sense, the God doesn't have to follow the morals he creates for you. Like he's quite literally held to a different standard. He's not even held to a standard, really. Like, how are you gonna hold God to a standard? What are you gonna do? Like, it's just fucking stupid.
And everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think.
He said there's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. I mean, I get what he's trying to say, but that's a funny analogy. There are no hyperlinks in the Bible, everybody. Just so we're clear.
It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think
Yeah,
that
no,
if
you
we
don't.
Putting the
say
cart
that something is
before the
Christian
horse.
ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking
How do
about
you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
The main character. He's looking at Christianity like it's fucking anime. I hate these people.
So
How do you think you should deal with the
Sure,
morality
sure,
of
sure,
war?
sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. But sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with
Well,
that
I just think that
question?
it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. That like the Christian God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian.
Wait. He doesn't have to. Like, he is the standard. It's not about him fitting within. Like, you can't fit within your own standard necessarily. Like, I mean, you can fit within your own standard, but if you are the standard, you don't necessarily have to fit within any particular like ideal that somebody looking from the inside out assumes you should. Because if you're making the rules and you determine what the rules are, you can't really be like, oh, well, you're not following these rules. You can do that to a normal person, sure. You can call them a hypocrite. I mean, you could call God a hypocrite. But the thing is, God isn't like you. He's not a human. So it wouldn't really be him being a hypocrite. He would just be holding a different standard for himself as a deity, right, so to speak, and you as a human who he apparently created. So holding your creation to a standard different from your own is not hypocritical or absurd. That's just kind of how it works.
Christian
I said
ethical.
that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my
Okay,
mouth.
sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah.
He is right. If you're going to say like, if you're going to go the route of saying like, oh, God doesn't fit within his own moral framework, then you have to like take the stories within their own context. Because if you remove them from their context, then you're just being intellectually dishonest.
And I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that within, is
slaughter
that in
them.
line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life as far
I'm not going to lie. That's not what he asked you, Jordan. That's not what he asked you. He's talking about the orders that God gave, not like the blood-soaked path of human history. Like, are you saying that God didn't actually tell him to do that? That they just wrote that there? Because this is a kind of like a dodge.
as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well-
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and do
ever
this
such a thing?
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to...
I'm not sure he's right about that. But to be fair, I mean, can't really get in God's head or whatever, So could have still been justified. I mean, at the end of the day, right? He's the guy who created you. You know how your mom always says, "I brought you in this world, I can take you out." It's pretty much accurate for God. Like, it's not even like hard for him to do, right?
genocide their
If he wanted to.
great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Look.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants.
Yeah, a genocide can be a war. He's right. Like if you're trying to genocide a group of people and they fight back, then it becomes a war. So the genocide is basically in the context of a war, not just like, some kind of concentration camp like World War II.
Infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it.
If we're only focusing on the infants, sure.
The answer I gave to the gentleman who was sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of these levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
To be fair, you can't really address something with a question. That's not how that works. You can clarify before you answer the question, but you can't address a question with a question. It doesn't really make sense.
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great knowledge,
I think
great
it's a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
by
like flawless. Yeah. So,
okay,
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a sec.
change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here's the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
It depends on what you mean by flawless. Like like we're not defining flawless by what you think is flawless in this sense. It's basically if there's this quote unquote flawless perfect being and they decide to feed you the information in a particular way that's going to be most advantageous to maybe you and them, even if you think that it's not, like, it doesn't change that. It could still be flawless. Just you're kind of trying to determine that it's a flaw yourself, but that doesn't mean that you're correct.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably...
no. You don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So the
Wait
argument is that
wait a sec. You said
wait a
find
sec.
one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously. I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but
Okay, how do we distinct? How do we distinct?
All right, I would say yeah. So Jordan is asking the right question here, because it's like you might not understand what the flawless perfect being is doing. That doesn't make it any less flawless or perfect. Just to be fair.
I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our...
we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things.
How do you know he's not? It's like, how do you know he's not? You're kind of denying the idea that he even could be. Like, this is silly.
Things at different times, that just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect and complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomenon itself?
So
like, for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, you know, maybe we'll understand like thousands of years in the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
wait a sec. Let's not go
because
that
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
First of all, you can have an all-knowing God and still have free will. What the fuck are you talking about? It just means he knows everything. But also, like, Jordan is right here. You can't have free will and actually like have the ability to choose what you're gonna do and all this. If he's constantly revealing everything, like the perfect being that knows all is constantly revealing everything to you, you're not really gonna have a free will. You're not really gonna be able to wrestle with anything yourself because, I mean, essentially everything's gonna be handed to you. Like all the knowledge you're gonna seek is gonna be handed to you. You're not gonna have to really work for anything, work to understand anything. You're not gonna really ever improve. Like, you're basically saying, like, why didn't the perfect being create you to be, like, the perfect slave or whatever? Which is, like, I mean, as far as they're concerned, that's not why you were created.
Yeah, and
you said, why wouldn't God... Well, you know,
it's
1,000 years of deep-thinking philosophers would disagree with you.
And 1,000 years of, or at least like last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love.
Like, that's not true. It's not true at all.
then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an
If you create something and then you have the ability to predict every single thing that could possibly happen, does the thing not have free will just because you're able to see all of the possible futures that could ever possibly happen? That's what people miss in this conversation. They assume that it's like set in stone everything you're going to do. It's like, no, every time you make a choice, you create potentialities. And God can see all of those. So it doesn't matter which one you pick. He can see it and he can predict it. So he's still all knowing. It's just that you could say, possibly, depending on your changes and because you have free will, you could make a decision that maybe he didn't expect you to make. But that doesn't mean it wasn't within his knowledge that it was something that you could do and what would happen after you did it. That's kind of what they're talking about here.
all good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
tried to
understand the
make
argument?
yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks the power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the
Yeah, I don't know why Jordan answered like that. I mean, like, just to be fair, if you're thinking like an all-powerful God and he can do all things, then yes, he could have created us in a different universe.
the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Which means
This part doesn't really have anything to do with like morality. They're kind of off topic here. This doesn't really have much to do with Christian morality. They're just kind of getting into the minutia of like whether or not everything is predetermined.
means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, like under
Like I
your
said,
view,
if you
under
want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by
I'm sorry, I fucking hate this like homo Parker in the background sitting up here nodding like this guy's making sense. He's not making sense. These are bad arguments.
making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
doesn't make
Causally,
it determined.
Yeah, inevitable doesn't mean determined.
causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely,
No, it doesn't.
yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return.
Yeah, it's not. And again, they're off topic. This is why this nigga got voted out. They're off topic. Because I'll be honest, the last guy he talked to for the majority of that prompt. Like it was like 7 to 10 minutes he was talking to that guy. Nobody voted that guy off. So clearly there was a problem with his argumentation. Or these motherfuckers just really wanted to get their 2 cents in. But yeah, there was clearly a problem with this guy because even they voted him off.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy.
I've seen this guy before.
Name.
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How you doing?
I'm doing
I just love how thirsty they are to get to the chair.
well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm
good.
surrounded by atheists.
My question to you. Let me
Hey, great. He says, I would have answered, I'm doing terrible. I'm surrounded by atheists.
scoot in. Would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Okay.
I wish he'd have been a little bit more clear. He's using like his own definitions for this stuff. I mean, like it's technically not his own. He's kind of like articulating what Christian morality is based on, like the basis of it. But it's just like he's not really being clear enough. And because he knows what they're gonna say, he knows what they think he means by Christian morality.
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but it'll
morality
come
is.
in
Yeah, it's kind of vague.
handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different like disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's,
It is foundational. Fair enough.
exhaustive.
Yeah, yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand, that's the same claim.
Yeah, yeah. If there are other theologies
He's right. That is difficult to understand because I don't think that's the same claim at all.
and disciplines
Yeah.
that have similar types of values,
Yeah.
how then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance. So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention, right? And the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish
he's actually
foundational morality,
right
and then
here.
that bled into Christianity.
I'm not gonna lie, Joe Jordan's kind of cooking. I mean, you know, if you really want to be 100 about it, like, you know, Jesus is just kind of modeled off of Horus, but that's another story for another time.
I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. Now, I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system. And I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus.
Did it defeat paganism? Because I'm not gonna lie, like colonization and you know, kind of war kind of, you know, defeated them a little bit more. You know, there was a large part of this that was them kind of wiping out other groups that believe different things and kind of forcing conversion to a certain degree. They're not like directly like the Muslims all the time, where like, you know, you must convert or whatever. But it's like, you know, if you conquer a civilization and then you start spreading your own religion, it's not that much different. So I wouldn't say it quote unquote defeated them. Not like in the what you say, the marketplace of ideas or anything. That's not really how Christianity spread for the most part. People kind of like to say that, but that's not really what happened.
Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
That's a good start, you know, because I would say that actually constitutes belief. You know, like you said, well, look,
Right.
in Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay, he regards that inspiration as God, right? And when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists not understanding.
That does speak more to the first prompt, atheists not understanding what they're rejecting. But I'm not convinced that speaks to atheists accepting Christian morality. Like somewhat, but not really.
Have you taken inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take?
That was a very honest answer from Jordan. Because to be honest with you, like, yes, a lot of this does come from Egyptian mythology. And yes, they've basically packaged it into a different framework. But I mean, like you can see he was honest there. He said, yeah, I've just kind of incorporated into something else. Now, would atheists be that honest though?
Take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims.
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth.
Yeah, like, yes and no. Like he's saying there are different times, he's about to say there are different kinds of truth claims.
Claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very
Yeah, actions speak louder than words. That's basically what he's saying.
clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things.
They don't, and he admitted that. He did. I don't know if this guy remembers, but he just admitted that.
that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values?
Technically, the Christians don't claim that it originated in Christianity. Like a lot of them would say it originated in Judaism, and you might have a bit more pushback from like the Jews and whether it originated with them or not. But if you know your history, it's pretty clear that it didn't.
Values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else.
Well,
that you
one
brought
of,
up.
one of,
Pause there. You've been voted out.
that was good. That was good. Yeah.
That was a good back and forth. They were actually pretty much on topic the entire time.
Hi.
Hello there. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this like Christian
Is that another Black Queen?
morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it.
What? Why is her nose so fucking red? She looks like a cartoon character. I'm not gonna lie.
Specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture and that concept
Those are some large bifocals.
of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well, I can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's
sectarian belief.
Hey, did she ask him to explain the rapture? I'm sorry, I don't know. I feel like I missed something here.
This like Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree.
Does that really have to do with Christian morality? I don't even think all Christians believe in the rapture. That's like a particular interpretation. I could be wrong. But the rapture? What?
With that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well, I can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was saying. Like, it's more of a sectarian belief. So he's basically saying that's something that particular sects believe in. Yeah, I'm pretty sure most Christians don't believe in the rapture.
Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but
Yeah.
that doesn't have anything to do with it.
I mean, they believe in heaven and hell. And I think that's kind of the idea of what the rapture is predicated on, especially if you're like me and you believe that like hell is earth. That's actually like the world we're living in. And if you were to make it to heaven, you would be taken off of earth and granted entrance into heaven, or so to speak. So then everybody that would be left here would basically be in hell. That's kind of how I look at it. But yeah, that would be the closest thing to like the rapture from that viewpoint, if that's what she's trying to say.
With me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about you
question?
know that you put yourself there?
Do you think is sin like a part of Christian morality?
What do you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part.
the
It's missing
concept of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target, right? And so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target, and that you can miss it in many ways. And the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be pointless.
What
People
if
will
I
turn
like
against
don't
you.
believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error?
I
Have you made
don't-
any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the
Well,
idea
that's a Christian belief.
of the idea
Yeah. It's funny because she's kind of proving his point. she's because this is the Christian viewpoint. They believe that you can quote unquote be saved from your sins, that you can fix your mistakes.
of hell, I don't believe
No, it's
in
also
it
a
because
Christian belief, by the way.
a Christian belief is hell.
No, that there's no sin. Well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a
Yeah.
Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think
Well, okay, let me
that
a-
when you
okay,
can I
that's
explain a
good.
little bit?
Sure.
Okay. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by, and so there are certain things. That
Oh,
lead you
so
down
it's
a dangerous
never your
path. Once you
fault.
are dead, I think you're kind of removed.
Accountability? Can you say accountability? It's never your fault. It's just the circumstances you're in. Go figure that a woman would be making this argument.
removed of that person. There's no like, there are no factors of the earth that have
about
to.
what happens after death.
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in that.
Okay,
but I
that's
also
the thing
do
to
think
find
that,
out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe.
Sometimes. Okay.
And somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences.
Does that change the fact that you did it? Like, I could say I was in this environment and I feel like I was forced to do this thing, but at the end of the day, you could have done something else. So you can't really blame the circumstances or the environment. You know, it's still you that makes the choice at the end of the day. So this is just like a fundamental lack of accountability. But again, I mean, it's a woman making the argument, so.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay, then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian doctrine?
You believe
if you would go to hell for those things?
You believe you can improve,
Yeah.
right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that. Yeah, those are all Christian presuppositions.
I guess maybe we have different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like
I think
it.
that my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations
Well,
of
let me
Christianity.
give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession. That was good.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
That was a good back and forth. But he basically just started teaching her, like schooling her, because she didn't know what the fuck she was talking about. But like, hey, I mean, you ideally that would be what these are for, not a bunch of gotcha questions and attempts to destroy.
I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Okay, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My
Oh, the Black Queen. He picked the Black Queen. Hey. See, I told you. She cute too.
name is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't.
Oh, damn. Damn. Even though I kind of disagree with what she's saying. Okay, I see you.
See, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time, culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also said you cannot say whether this.
There really isn't. I mean, does she know what a parable is? Or like the point of like a fable? Like, they're kind of just telling you a story in order to get across a moral idea. And whether or not you get the idea is another story. But that doesn't mean they didn't intend for you to interpret it a certain way. It's just that nowadays we tend to especially take somebody else's interpretation that's criticizing it and be like, oh, well, they're probably right about what they actually intended you to get from this, rather than, looking at like the people and even the scholars that originally wrote the shit, or the people that they passed down succession to after they died, telling them like what it was supposed to mean. Like, I would take the people who probably the closest to it as like, the authorities on it for the most part. But, hey, you don't have to.
This story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
See, that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits, you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's
Yeah.
interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily expected.
But I think it's also, and I think she's genuinely asking this question because I mean, I probably go up similar to her. Or she probably has like, a Christian mom or dad or whatever. I mean, a lot of the black community is Christian and they're like Protestants as well. So there's like also kind of an issue with them having a bunch of different interpretations within that. Because, one church might be a Baptist church. One church might be a Episcopalian or whatever the hell. Like fucking, a lot of black people are Baptists. But they have different interpretations even within their own religion. It's not really the case for like Catholics and Orthodox. So that's why they tend to be a little bit better as far as growing up within that structure, because you will come to this kind of conclusion if you grow up in like a Protestant dominant culture, because they can't even agree on the interpretations. So you can imagine how it'd get a little confusing. But yeah.
Expected that to be the case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence that all converged on something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There's a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence.
Yeah, what he's doing is not new. He's just packaging it in a way that's easier to digest when you're growing up in a culture which is like what I said, like kind of Protestant dominant. So you have these competing interpretations, but you also have, you got a large amount of atheists, right? You got a decent amount of people pushing back against the idea in general. So even when I was like, a kid, like, I didn't only have to deal with the fact that there were Christians who believed a lot of different things and had a lot of competing views and interpretations of what the Bible said. There were also people who weren't Christians who were analyzing what the Bible said, coming up with their own interpretations. And when you're absorbing all of that, like, you got to analyze all of it. And some answers are lacking and some answers are better. Some interpretations seem to offer more. And especially when you're in a society that values, science and psychology and all these different types of interpretations from these scientific authorities and academic authorities, somebody like Jordan Peterson kind of breaking it down from a psychological perspective, it makes it easier to digest and even to engage with other people. Because the other thing is that you also have to deal with people that are going to push back against what you believe in, and you're going to have to be able to hold your own and be able to explain why you believe what you believe to these kind of people that'll be trying to convert you to something else. So it gives you a little bit more of a leg to stand on in this kind of society that we're living in.
Evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right, be the most plausible. Because in
It's
regards
an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote-unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result.
See, those Protestants, and they were right. The fracture of the Protestants did not really help.
In an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like
Protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about like how these interpretations of the Bible, like if they kind of resonate with us. And I think that can in some case be some kind of like evidence. Oh, this might be true, but I think we need to ask: is evidence damning? Right? Is this evidence certain? Right?
Yeah.
So, but I do want to look at again the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at again the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah. So I believe this is a meta truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy. And I'm sure that there is in some way, the story was put in here for a reason, right? To tell us about fights.
I wouldn't use the story of Cain and Abel, but yeah, I mean, like, unless you're okay with fratricide, there's pretty much one way to interpret that story.
Between brothers, but also you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological historical sense as a historical fact. Were there two people like that were specifically referenced.
Well, yeah, you can't really say that you know whether it's true or not, but I mean, you could surmise. Like you'd have to know all of what happened in history, like the entirety of history, what happened at the beginning of humanity, essentially to know that. Because Cain and Abel are like the sons of Adam and Eve. So, I mean, if you're going with the biblical story that Adam and Eve were the first two humans on Earth, we could pretty much conclude that the story is not factually true, but that it's trying to reveal something to you. Whether it's true or not, it's like factually is kind of irrelevant. And I would argue that most people probably don't believe that it's true. But yeah, who knows? Especially when you got young Earth creationists, like they probably believe everything word for word, or most of it word for word.
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but
Right.
I'm not sure why it matters
Right.
to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because
Yeah, it's not really knowable. I could get why that kind of thing would matter to you, though, if you're like kind of an existentialist or whatever.
we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says. And the
Many
things-
ways.
Right, but like if we interpret
Sometimes poetry, sometimes history,
Well,
sometimes facts,
But for
sometimes
example,
metaphor.
the reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's like 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who
don't
died for our sins is
know what
important,
that is.
right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just like, you believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our
That's
sins.
true.
So if you believe one and not the other,
Yeah, she's cooking a little bit.
that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, like, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, like even as just like events, like, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happen, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of like the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to like our fate.
Now she's pretty much correct here. Like, so for example, the reason I don't call myself a Christian is because I don't believe the whole Jesus died on the cross for your sins or whatever. Does that mean I don't believe that Jesus was a person who died on the cross? Not necessarily. You could probably show me evidence that Jesus was somebody that existed and that he was crucified, and I could accept that as like a historical fact or whatever. But then the extra step of saying, oh, well, he died on that cross for my sins to save me as a human, and he was God in the flesh. That's an extra claim that I have a difficulty accepting because of a lack of evidence. But it doesn't ultimately matter unless we're speaking in terms of like Christianity and what it means to be a Christian. Like other than that, I mean, you could still interpret the Bible correctly, whether or not you take certain things as actual historical fact. But that is one of the important parts.
You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that? You pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well, there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling.
Yeah, he's right. Like you can't know this kind of thing for sure. And you're not, and the thing is, you're not speaking to a Christian. If you were speaking to a Christian, they may be intellectually honest about the fact that they don't know for sure. Because that's what faith is. That's why faith is a large part of the religion. It's like you can't necessarily know for sure, but that's literally what faith is. Having faith that it is true. So there's a gap in knowledge, and you take a lot of it on faith.
I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture. I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any
Technically.
societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the question
It's not nothing.
that you're asking. It's the case that forever when
It ain't nothing.
people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestle with exactly the question that you just described. When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again,
Yeah, how are you supposed to interpret every specific part? Like, what parts are fact? What parts are poetry? What part is fable? Like, I don't know.
if these historical events happened or not, that can be deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity.
And the only thing I think that matters as far as whether someone is damned to hell for eternity, at least as far from the Christian perspective, is believing that Jesus is God. I think that's the only thing, or that he like walked the earth or whatever. Yeah, that's the only thing that really matters. But I think a lot of everything else is like, you could still interpret it correctly, whether or not it's like true. You can still interpret the message that's trying to be conveyed correctly.
Or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question. You know, like that would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint. And I'm not putting that down, by the way. You're asking me a question I really can't answer.
Okay.
I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I mean, from a scientific perspective, right? This would be the way that you would determine which is more valid or more likely to be true. Like, if the idea is to achieve a particular result or outcome, end game, then looking at which interpretation best leads you to that outcome, and determining that one does or doesn't, is how you would basically determine whether or not that's the correct interpretation. Now, there probably could be multiple interpretations that could lead you to that outcome, and it might be designed that way specifically. Like, you know, I mean, if God is truly all-knowing and all-powerful, then, you know, I mean, he would probably package it in a way that you could interpret it multiple ways and get to the same conclusion.
Wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. You know, well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation.
That's
but
true.
Knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the
Which that actually speaks back to the point that morality and purpose can't be found within science. Because science can tell you what the world is made up of and why things happen, explain phenomena and certain things like that. But it can't tell you like the purpose of these things necessarily. It can only explain to you like how it works and what it is.
relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that,
why is the burden on Christianity?
because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can
What
again,
evidence would you say?
Well, no, the burden is on Christianity because Christianity makes a positive claim that there is this God and there is this particular outcome that is being aimed at by God, or whatever you could say. But yeah, I mean, Christianity does make the positive claim. Now, I mean, technically, like, atheists do make a positive claim as well, but it's technically like a negative claim, just like there's not a God and there's not necessarily any particular purpose that we are supposed to have as human beings beyond, I guess, you know, the biological one. But yeah, the burden does tend to lie on the person making the positive claim, so it would lie on Christianity.
What evidence would you accept?
that would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack, and then it kind of gets to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Although if you were an agnostic, that would kind of be like the default. The agnostics are the only ones that are actually not making a positive claim at all. You could argue that atheists are making a different type of positive claim, and they make other positive claims, but it's mostly like a negative claim. And the only people that are really making a positive claim are the religious.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you so much.
Very good. I
And yes, he did pick the right person. Shout out to my queens.
don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people.
Yeah, Jordan is more of a conversationalist, but this is a very this is a contentious space. Like, this is like more of a debate sphere. I'm kind of glad he stepped into it though. Like, people are making fun of him. He didn't really do as bad as they said, He's just ironically enough, he's just too good faith. This is not really like the best arena to step in and be so good faith to like people who aren't trying to be good faith to you, because they're going to be trying to get you and trap you and not really understand what you're trying to say. They're more just like ready to combat it before it even comes out of your mouth. So that's not really a productive way to have a conversation.
To see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration and establishment of like a harmonious understanding and peace.
Jordan Peterson, out of all of the kind of theists that are on the internet, he's one of the better ones in regards to just like being genuine as a person. But I do feel like he does a lot of, I guess, wordplay that can make it a little bit difficult and kind of just muddies the waters in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today. I think if the average person followed what Jordan Peterson said, they'd realize that fundamentally Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. In fact, uses many atheistic principles and
He's not a Christian. He's not an atheist either. He said it. I played the video at the beginning of the stream yesterday. Like, Jordan Peterson years ago said he's not an atheist anymore because he doesn't view the world in the materialist sense anymore. But that doesn't mean that he's a Christian. And if Jordan Peterson turned you into an atheist, you're fucking retarded. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I don't know how you let Jordan Peterson turn you into an atheist, especially if you're like, this guy supposedly like was studying like, you know, religious studies and shit and all this other stuff in college. You got bigger problems, bro. It's not you. You can't blame Jordan for you being a dumbass.
operated under bad faith by seeming to forget what basic words meant when he didn't want to answer a question.
His definitions can kind of shift a little bit depending on the moment, and I think that he wasn't afraid to flex.
His definitions don't shift. He gives you like a boiled down version, which is fair. I mean, like if you ever read a dictionary, you're not going to get the same definition of certain concepts and words. You're not going to get the same definition of concepts and words that you're going to get as you would if you opened up like an encyclopedia, right? It's going to give you a more in-depth explanation of the concept or the word. So it's not that his definitions were like shifting necessarily. It's more that, first of all, he wants to make sure you're using the same definition, and then he's going to expound upon that definition as the conversation continues. That's how most people, especially in a formal debate, are going to do it, unless you ask for a long, fleshed out definition. And then you're still probably going to get tangled in the weeds there. And part of the reason of having a back and forth is that, you know, maybe the person's going to edit their definition. But there were a couple times where Jordan was like a little too vague on the definition, and he could have been a little bit more pointed with the definition. So I give him that.
That definitional muscle.
And I felt really good about our conversation. I thought that it highlighted some key issues in Jordan Peterson's theology.
No, it didn't. This guy was actually probably one of the worst guys to engage, even though he was actually on topic. Like, for the people that were on topic, he was one of the worst.
I hope he reflects on these issues and maybe deepens his perspective on them in the future.
With Zena, she was able to build up such a rapport that he chose her in the end, and they were able to have extended dialogue, which is something I had hoped for. So maybe I learned a little something from Zena about being more cordial.
It's extraordinary.
Or just actually trying to understand what a person is saying. Like, that's your problem.
Extraordinarily useful to be able to model productive debate and conversation for people and see how my thoughts were landing with people who are particularly skeptical, and to put that in front of a large audience and to assess the consequences.
Yeah, like, I mean, that was like an exhibition for Jordan, clearly. But yeah, I don't think this was as bad as people were making it out to be. I definitely don't. But yeah, so there's that. I might do another stream later. Because there was like this bill that passed in like Texas. I was watching this video, or this guy was kind of breaking down
Sure. To
this
attack certain people.
this bill that could like heavily affect anime. And as a weeb myself, I might be somewhat worried about how this could happen. But you never know. I do want to like kind of review this video a little bit. This guy is probably one of the guys that's making one of the better points, I think. Like, It's like, oh, well, regardless of if it's a child, I think it's kind of whatever the bill is saying is regardless of whether it's a child or not, you get in trouble for depicting images that look like a child, performing certain acts and portrayed in a certain way or something or whatever. And like this guy had like a perfect example of like, the character Chi-Chi from Dragon Ball could easily fall under this broad interpretation. So he might break down something like either this video or another one going over this bill a little later today. But this is just a quick stream. We're going to end it here. About to catch the Griff report. I'll be back later tonight for you guys. And I got to continue my playthrough of Devil May Cry. Since Kick deleted like all of my shit. Not sure exactly where I want to go from here. I'm probably going to continue the playthrough of Devil May Cry since I'm still like on the first one. I took like a break and I was playing some other games and shit. We can just start back there. Try to get through it a little faster though. But for now, that's all we got. I will catch you beautiful people next time.